Let me tell you something. Boys are bad for you. Stay away from them. I was brought up in the 80s, and like many good girls, I was a member of the Girl Guides Association. We were taught how to be socially responsible citizens, and would often go for activities like tree planting and visiting children's homes. Like many of you, my parents placed a very high emphasis on education, and they always told me to stay away from boys. It therefore comes as no surprise that girls who tended to focus on boys had a tendency to stray away from their studies. In the Ekirapa household, education was taken very seriously. Being the only girl at the time, expectations on me were very high. And my dad's passion for excellence and hard work would instill fear in us. He would always demand to see our report cards, and any score of B- and below would result in a thorough scolding and an hour-long lecture. I'm sure that many of you can relate to that. Luckily, at that time, I was focused on my studies, and I was performing well. The only drawback being that I was a noisemaker and chatterbox in class. When I went to high school, I started developing an interest in boys. And since I was not allowed to go out on dates, I resorted to spending time on the phone. This would often result in a tug of war between my dad and I, because he was the one paying the bills. So of course he was annoyed. He would come home every evening, and I was always on the phone. I remember this one time during the school holidays. He came home, and he picked up the phone, and there was a young gentleman on the other end of the phone. So when this guy asked to speak to Akaco, my dad replied, "Akaco will be back next year," and he hung up the phone. So that was the environment in our household. So after high school, I got the opportunity to go to the US for further studies, and I was now free to mingle with boys and not have any curfews or any person tapping my phone. So in this excitement, I went out and met guys. Unfortunately, I kissed many frogs and got heartbroken, including meeting an Oga at the top, who actually was busted by the cops for growing weed in his backyard in Minnesota. So needless to say, I did not date for a while after that. But not all was lost. I eventually came back to Kenya and found my true love in my early 30s. I first met Brian Gashohe when I was at work. He was a software developer, and I was a researcher at the time. And I remember the first time I met him, I was so irritated because he was always laughing, and he was always happy. So I always used to wonder, why is this guy always happy? And whenever he met somebody, he would go beyond the usual pleasantries of just knowing your name. He would actually want to find out more about you. So in my case, he was interested about me because he thought I was from an exotic tribe. So he was very curious to know about Akaco. We ended up becoming friends because he was always the one throwing office parties, and we also discovered we had mutual friends that we shared. We would also socialize in the office committees, and as we got to know each other, he actually started teaching me about football. I actually know who Ty and Claude are from Arsenal TV because of Brian. And he also wanted me to be more of an active citizen in Kenya. He's the one who actually wanted me to vote and to be more active and participate in my rights as a citizen. So as we got to know each other more, we eventually started dating, and then decided to settle down after courting for about 3 years. My favorite moments of our dates were going for nyama choma and also having intellectual discussions about UFOs. He always had this fantasy about life outside of Earth and would always tell me about these latest discoveries about scientists and about why people only believe in Earth. So of course, I would not agree with him, and we were always constantly battling over this. But interestingly, he actually made me start reading about it because I just could not understand why somebody was so intrigued about life on another planet. So as we continued getting to know each other, I would be subjected to more gruesome matches of watching Arsenal lose and then having to watch the post-analysis with Cloud and Ty on Arsenal TV. And in return, I would subject him to hours of entertaining visitors at home. We were what you would call an average couple, just trying to meet the demands of hectic life in Nairobi. The highlight of our lives came last year when our firstborn son, Tesla, was born. And Brian was ecstatic, to say the least. I was very happy to become a mother. And I remember that he was so supportive of me during my pregnancy. He would always accompany me to the antenatal clinic and always wanted to know about my health and the baby's health, and really, really encouraged me through the process. And as many women here, I'm sure, know, you don't feel the best, but he would still call me a spring chicken and still encourage me through the whole process. So as we continued with life, I remember one day on Friday, June 16th, 2017, I had an early morning meeting, and I remember rushing, just trying to get ready to go for this meeting. And that morning, I left Brian. He had been watching TV and fallen asleep on the couch. So I decided to rush for my meeting because I figured I would just talk to him later, and I just took off. So after the meeting, which ended just before lunchtime, I was still contemplating on whether I should go home or whether I should go shopping. So I decided on the former, given that I'd had a long week, and I just said, let me just go and rest. So I remember getting home at around 2 p.m., and as I got home, I had a very uneasy feeling as I entered the house. And as I opened the door, I immediately stopped in my tracks. I got a shock when I found Brian seated on the sofa where I had left him in the morning. So when I rushed to him and I tried to wake him up, he was not responding. I immediately tried to call my family. I called everybody, nobody was picking the phone. Called my neighbor, nobody was picking. Called for the ambulance. Ambulance said there was no ambulance. I tried calling again, there was no ambulance. And luckily at that time, my sister-in-law answered. She called me back. So when she called me back, she immediately jumped into panic mode. And sorry. And she called the other members. So they started arriving, and all this time, the ambulance could not see what the problem was. So when we went to the hospital, that is when they declared that he had passed. And I just remember that time stopped, and I just didn't know what was happening. It felt like a bad dream. And everybody was just confused because we didn't know what to do. And I just remember his colleagues had said how he was full of life the previous day before. He hadn't shown any signs of heart disease. So we were just in shock. And on that day, I learned that life is not fair. His friends were just reminding me how he was always there for everybody, and anybody who knew him knew that he was a lover of people, that he always looked for the good in people, and he was always leaving everybody with a smile. And that was a good thing that they reminded me about. So is life fair? For me, life is not fair because I do not understand why my son would have to grow up without a father who loved him very much. On that day, the angel of death had crept into our home and suddenly robbed us of a shining star, one that shone so brightly, only to dim away. So, what have I learned from this experience? I have learned that life must go on. I am learning about the process of renewal and restoration through my son Tesla, who I see growing every day. I'm also learning that you have to live for today because life does not always follow the script and it does not always work out the way you want it to work out. And you also have to just pick up the pieces and move on. For those of you with loved ones, please tell them that you love them because life is short. And remember that as long as we're here on earth, we're all humans and no one is perfect. Thank you.